Here for today's episode, we have our Liverpool reporter, James Pearce. David Ornstein will be joining us. And also we've got author and biographer of Jurgen Klopp. Bring the noise. The Athletics, Raphael Honigstein as well. Right, James, let's get into this. Let's start with you, James. Honestly, I think I was taken by shock on Friday when I heard the news, considering where Liverpool are in particular in domestic competitions and in Europe as well. What are your thoughts? And I know you were at Anfield as well yesterday.
Yeah, it was an absolute bombshell. I got a message off someone about a minute before the news went public, and it was one of those ones where you had to read it two or three times and think this can't quite be real because, as you said, especially in the context of the season Liverpool are having, still in contention for glory on four fronts. You look at the work that Klopp has done in terms of rebuilding that team and you were just kind of left scratching your head thinking, why? And certainly that was the mood around Anfield on Sunday with people I've spoke to, people still kind of shell-shocked, really, just trying to get to grips with the news. There's a real mix of emotions. I think there was sadness, but also massive appreciation because, when you think about where Liverpool were at as a club when he first walked in and where they're at now, and I think, it kind of the mood changed over the course of the afternoon on Sunday because it was pretty somber to start with. But then the noise just grew and grew and grew because I think there is that collective feeling of, right, we have to ensure that this era gets the dream finale that it deserves.
Yeah, and Rafa, from a German perspective, obviously, most recently we know Jurgen Klopp was linked with the German national team job. What's the reaction?
Yeah, a strange mix of shock and some kind of optimism, or I don't know what the right word is, but maybe I think in Spanish they would probably say ilusión,
Mm.
a vision that Klopp might arrive as national team manager before too long. So a sense of anticipation almost between those two poles, I think. But yeah, Klopp has been synonymous with Liverpool now, even in Germany for the last few years. He's ubiquitous on German television, advertising, all sorts of stuff. And he is the kind of sort of iconic football figure that Germany haven't had probably since the latter stages of Franz Beckenbauer post playing career. So he is the biggest football personality in Germany, and therefore massive news. I always know that news transcends football. If my mum texts me about something, and she did.
Did your mom text you, David, about Jurgen Klopp leaving?
I think everybody had that feeling of I was there or where I was moment.
Yeah.
You're kind of gonna remember that for a long time to come. I was actually walking around a supermarket, which isn't particularly either glamorous or an ideal place to start working on a story like this, and having frantic phone calls to try and find out the details of what happened, how it came about, and where things go next, while picking tins and packets off of shelves and paying at the checkout. But it's the sort of news that it means so much to so many in terms of Liverpool fans, the Premier League, all of us in the media. Klopp has been a staple of everybody's lives and the competition and global football for every day since 2015, 8th of October when he arrived, my first son's first birthday. And it's kind of it's going to be really strange without him. And look, he's not perfect. We've seen some moments that he would probably reflect on with not so much pride, such as some of his slightly iconic and infamous reactions towards match officials, which is not really to be condoned. But on the whole, it's been an historic, incredible period, remarkable competition for Goliath in Manchester City. The rebuilding of Liverpool post Hicks and Gillette, and the near miss under Brendan Rodgers, and many of us will remember the trip to Kiev for that Champions League final that ended in disappointment, the Mo Salah shoulder injury, etc., the Gareth Bale overhead kick. Yet they came back and went again with this amazing crop of players in Madrid 12 months later. Then they went and ended their wait 30 years for a Premier League title. Shame for them. It was obviously behind closed doors, but no less sort of iconic as an achievement. And it's been impressive the way that he's rebuilt, not just recently with these signings last summer, but after a really horrible period for him personally and professionally during COVID. When he lost his mother, couldn't really travel back to Germany, was on his own. They had a awful injury record, bad luck with Virgil van Dijk, Joel Matip, Joe Gomez. Their recruitment in the January window that year was not ideal. I think it was Kabak and is it Davies from Preston, and they struggled, but then they brought in Konate early in the next summer, and they went again. And I love that sort of reinvention that Klopp showed. And I did think that he would do it for a little bit longer. Now the contract, maybe we'll come on to speak more about the detail, but the contract's signed till 2026. My information is that there was an understanding it was really 2025, and they would all put their heads together and decide whether they wanted to go on, almost like the final 12 months were an option. If that is the case, then we're into the final 18 months now. And if you're a player, in most cases, clubs would be looking to either renew you or sell you, and the forward planning needs to begin. And it's much more significant with a manager. They're in control and involved in so many more elements of the club, and there are people's lives and careers that depend on decisions like these. And we've just seen like the magnitude of Liverpool's announcement. It wasn't just that Klopp's going, it's his whole staff. It's that the sporting director's going even earlier. I mean, this is the biggest upheaval you'd imagine that Liverpool have had really in modern history anyway, just because of what he bought and meant and symbolized, and the people involved. And so we're about to enter the most big and newsworthy period that Liverpool will have gone through in a long time. It's going to keep us on our toes for a long time to come.
James, how do you think they've kept this quiet since November? I mean, it's clearly been bubbling for a little while, right?
Yeah, I think the key was it was only known by a very select few. That was pretty clear. Even members of the backroom staff that have been there a long time, who aren't among the group, the immediate coaching staff who will be leaving with Jurgen in the summer. They weren't aware until a staff meeting was called just before the 10:30 a.m. players meeting last Friday. So the staff were informed, then the players were informed, and then they pressed the button on the public announcement. So yeah, it was back in November when the phone call first went into Mike Gordon, the FSG president, that this was a decision he'd come to. I know that the owners, having worked with him for so long and with the relationship having been so good, they knew that Jurgen Klopp wouldn't have made a decision like this lightly. It wasn't a knee-jerk thing. They knew that there would be no ability to talk him out of it. It was never going to be about money or transfer budgets or anything like that. But I think that passage of time from November through to the back end of January, there was always that glimmer of hope for them that maybe he might change his mind. But once that had not happened, and Klopp himself was determined to get it out there, because I think just with the way that things were at, Liverpool were at a point where, in terms of the search for a successor, you can do background work, you can do all the data stuff, and Will Spearman, the director of research there, him and his team have got a big part to play in recruiting a successor in terms of crunching the numbers and trying to find the ideal candidate who will work stylistically. But of course, you then reach a point where it's like, if you're going to start going out there to speak to candidates and speak to agents, then of course the news would leak out, and Klopp didn't want that. He wanted to do it on his terms, which meant players and supporters and staff hearing it from him rather than reading about it in the media.
Yeah, David mentioned about COVID and Rafa, and you just sort of think on a human level, how much that period could have taken out of someone like Klopp, his mother passing away and things like that. Do you think, taking all that into consideration, and I know he talks about not having as much strength as he used to be, this decision was more than likely because probably emotionally, mentally, physically, he doesn't see himself being that rock and roll Jurgen Klopp in the same way moving forward.
Well, that's sort of the strange part of that decision, because on one hand, it didn't come out of the blue. There had been stories going around and rumors in Germany that he is perhaps coming towards the end of his time at Liverpool, that he's looking at the German national job, that he wants a different rhythm. And all these stories emerged in that season during COVID, or towards the end of it, when they had that bad year, 2021, when they finished third. But he was very miserable. You could see that he wasn't enjoying either Liverpool's form nor the fact that COVID made football a lot less exciting. I think he is somebody who has always used the international breaks to the fullest advantage. He would go to places in the sun, whether that's South Africa or in Spain, to just recharge his battery. And that year that wasn't possible. So on top of losing his mum, playing in an empty stadium, having lots of injuries, football not working, plus no ability to escape this kind of the prison or the confines of life that existed during COVID, I think that was the gestation of the sense that maybe I need something a little bit different. But then at the same time, the decision, as James has alluded to, was surprising, because from seeing Klopp and speaking to him at games this season, you got the sense that this is Klopp really enjoying himself. This is Klopp getting the sense that Liverpool are in a fantastic position to win massive titles. The stadium is bigger than ever. The team has been rejuvenated, and here we go. And maybe I can outlast Pep at Man City and start winning things in regularity. But I guess ultimately he listened to himself and took stock of his energy levels. And I believe him when he said that he needed a different lifestyle, and that he had to leave and slow down a little bit at this point.
Yeah, James, I'm just quickly thinking it from a Scouse perspective, from a Liverpoolian perspective. You think about names like Bill Shankly, you think about Sir Kenny Dalglish, stalwarts etched into the history of Liverpool football team. Jurgen Klopp, without a shadow of a doubt, I mean, completed everything domestically, European success as well. And then look, we're saying it again, Premier League title potentially in the frame for that, on all fronts, domestically again, in the frame for that, and potentially Europa League again. I mean, this is massive, massive news for Scousers. And actually, you just feel, as he's losing energy, perhaps there's an energy also sapped out of the Liverpool fans as well.
Yeah, I think that's why it was such a seismic day on Friday, because we are talking about probably the most transformative figure in the club's history since Bill Shankly. And of course, there were other great managers since, but a lot of those managers inherited like a winning machine and were able to then carry on that history and tradition. Klopp inherited a team that were 10th in the Premier League. Liverpool had been a Champions League club once out the last 6 seasons before he arrived. Not only has he won everything, but it's the style in which he's done it, the way in which he's represented the fan base and the city, the way he's been a figurehead, the style of the football, and also making Fenway Sports Group's business model, the self-sustaining model, work, because it's that makes it all the more incredible what he's done. When you look at it, it's not been through a vast, throwing huge sums of money at it. Yes, there were some occasions when he bought the finished article in Van Dijk and Alisson, but more often than not, it's been about elevating players to the world-class bracket rather than buying world-class elite players. And he's done it so often, when the recruitment has been so incredible, that tactical nous mixed with the man management. So yeah, you're talking about, an absolutely impossible act to follow.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about Liverpool's overachieving because their expectations are so high. But when you see the force of nature that, say, Manchester City have become, and the levels of investment that some of the other Premier League teams, Manchester United and Chelsea, for example, even your Arsenals of this world, are committing, and Liverpool have tried to stick to this self-sustaining model, it's extraordinary what Klopp has done on a consistent basis. And even when things looked like they were slipping from beneath his feet, he pulled it back. And the exhaustion point that Raf and James have both talked about, there was a really good piece by Jonathan Northcroft in the Sunday Times, just sort of explaining the toll that it was taking on Jurgen Klopp, like it would anybody in his position, and the amount of things now that you take on your shoulders as a manager, the stresses and strains, the size of the clubs growing exponentially bigger, the various factors pulling you in different directions, from commercial to preseason tours to recruitment and medical, and all these different facets of clubs are expanding. And that's why the traditional role of manager in, say, the Sir Alex Ferguson, Arsene Wenger model is kind of dissipating, and you're seeing these head coaches just focusing on the training and various different people taking various different roles. And yet at Liverpool in recent times, following the departures of Michael Edwards, the sporting director, and then his successor soon after in Julian Ward, Jürgen Schmadtke coming in really just to give Jurgen Klopp a helping hand, as opposed to being the all-encompassing sporting director. And it was a relatively short-term thing. As we see, he's going to be leaving after the January window, which means he's only done 2 markets. All of that basically saw Klopp's authority and power and responsibility grow just at the moment where you probably think he might have needed more help than ever. Now, of course, maybe he relished the chance to be on top of more areas and have things more his own way. I don't know. But when you start to think of it like that, just in this era where you could do with more assistance, and he was possibly getting less, by no one's fault, by the way, that sort of draining element really starts to hit home. And there's a point I wanted to mention earlier. So in the piece that we put together, led by James, on sort of inside how this happened, I had a number of conversations for that, which reflected this feeling last summer. And I really wanted to be clear, because a lot of the feedback we got was, you're being wise after the event. Why didn't you say it then if you knew it at the time? We didn't really. There were whispers, but you're not just going to go out and report whispers. You want things to be credible. So now we've made the calls and checks and conversations for this piece. It's become quite clear that there were a number of players, staff, people at and around the club that thought that maybe the summer of 2024 might actually be a natural end, which would be a year before, when I said the contract was kind of understood to be ending 2025. And even to the extent that some were referring to it as the last dance, that everybody was going to galvanize one more time to try and go through to the Euros, for example, next summer, with age and contract status, meaning that perhaps for this group that had been so expertly built and nurtured by Klopp, it was a final push. And actually, it didn't quite work out like that, because you saw players such as Jordan Henderson, Roberto Firmino, and Fabinho all leaving last summer. But Mo Salah, Virgil van Dijk, Trent Alexander-Arnold did go on. And unless something changes between now and the summer, they're going to be looking at the final 12 months of their contract, which is another massive element to all of this going forward as well, and what they might do. And should Liverpool have moved earlier, or did the fact that they haven't moved on those contracts yet, with hindsight, set alarm bells ringing, or was that a signal that perhaps not all was how it normally would be, because Liverpool would get on top of these contract situations in normal circumstances? And so, that on reflection maybe says that this was a little bit signposted to some people, not necessarily to me. I've got messages from people saying, yeah, the writing was on the wall. And in fact, the way things were going last season, there were people, it's not me inventing it, who were saying, if it continues like this, then he could go at some point in this current season. Now, it's gone better than expected, but those sentiments don't build up for no reason. It comes from people's eyes and ears who are much closer to it than all of us. And so that's why I think it was expected by quite a few people that he might go in the summer of 2024. That wasn't a total shock. It was just that we didn't know the news was coming when it was announced, the timing, and also the fact that it was not just a feeling and a sentiment, but it was real. That is what kind of made the earth shake.
Yeah, James, David just alluded to it at the top of what you just said there in terms of, Klopp's, I guess, influence in the club now in many respects, right? That the club he inherited is very different in terms of infrastructure to the club he's now leaving. There was a sporting director then. Now there is an interim one, which is his appointment in many respects as well. Could you just give us a very quick overview of what the club looked like pre-Klopp to where it's at now in terms of all those components within it?
Yeah, well, it has changed a lot because, of course, it was early on in the Klopp reign when Michael Edwards was promoted to the role of sporting director, and that was key to the owners' kind of structure and club model at the time, that they didn't want this kind of real dominant managerial figure having influence across everything, because of course this is really the job of the sporting director, and you needed that kind of that healthy relationship where and why that's why it worked so well with Edwards and Klopp, was that Edwards was never shy about saying, no, we're not doing it like that. That is not the right player. There's lots of examples. Michael Edwards was, and Klopp has talked about this himself, he was huge on the signing of Mo Salah when, Klopp at the time was thinking about Julian Brandt earlier on in that year. And so there was a really good dynamic there that worked. And of course, what happens is when a manager is as successful as Klopp is, and also with his sheer force of personality, his influence just grows and grows across so many areas of the club. You can look upon it even right down to things like pre-season tours. They're now so much shorter than they used to be, because where before commercial would obviously say to Brendan Rodgers, right, we're going to Australia because we've been offered £10 million or something. Klopp, because of who he is and what he'd done, it was suddenly, no, that is not happening. This is what we're doing. Right across decisions, and I think that's probably why he's reached a point as well where he feels like he doesn't have the energy. He said about, I can't do the job on three wheels, because his job has been so all-encompassing. And as David touched upon there, the dynamic has shifted because obviously Michael Edwards departed. Julian Ward only stayed in the job for one season. Jörg Schmadtke was only ever, I think Jörg Schmadtke actually referred to himself as, I'm just here to serve Jurgen. That's not the normal dynamic between a sporting director and a manager. So this will be a huge reset this summer. And that's why I think it's interesting from the people I've spoken to that very much the intention is to get a sporting director in place before a new manager, because you want that sporting director to have a part to play in who that manager is going to be, to ensure that they can work together and try and ensure that there isn't the drop off that so many Liverpool fans will be fearful of.
Yeah, Rafa, we think about fatigue. You're talking about how enormous the job he's doing at Liverpool, and also the power structure and how he's got his hands in various parts of the infrastructure at Liverpool. Is this any similar to how he was at Dortmund by any chance?
No, Dortmund was very different. Dortmund was a triumvirate of very powerful people. You had the CEO, Hans-Joachim Watzke, you had the sporting director, Michael Zorc, and then you had Klopp, and the three of them decided things together, argued together, then made up together and celebrated for most of the time. And when Klopp resigned, it was more a case of feeling that he couldn't take this team any further, that this team needed a massive reboot. And the way the conversation was relayed to me, the three of them arrived at a point where he said, well, you can do two things. You can either fire 15 players or you can fire me. So in the end, they all looked at each other and thought, well, then it's probably going to be you, Jurgen. But he kind of suggested it himself almost. This is different. And I think the timing is interesting because, to me, it serves two purposes. First, I think there is a genuine concern on Klopp's behalf to make sure that the club have enough time to sort things out when it comes to talking to players about contract extensions, talking about new targets. You can't do this in May and June. It's far too late. So you have to do this now to let everyone know what's coming. And I think that was really key in one way. But it also, I think, helps Jurgen because it puts him in a situation where people know he's going to be available in one way or another in less than 6 months' time, and it will definitely serve as notice to the German FA that when things couldn't quite work out for mostly reasons of timing in the past, when it came to him being in charge for Germany at the Euros, for example, he will be, energy permitting, available to take them to the World Cup in 2026, which I think is hugely appealing.
Yeah, for sure. Very quickly, David, who then is in charge of leading that process to replace Jurgen Klopp?
Yeah, so and just to add to what we were talking about earlier, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way at all, but it sounds like Jurgen Klopp created a very demanding environment that has helped lead to this success, and so I'm sort of praising it. But that's not been easy for everybody. There's been quite a lot of departures from Liverpool behind the scenes as well. And you get the impression that it wasn't for everyone, which is fine. It happens at clubs. And I've spoken to people who should say, anybody complaining should be grateful because that success is on his shoulders. But, there are other elements to this which are fair to acknowledge. In terms of the succession plan, well, Mike Gordon, who's president of Fenway Sports Group and the key director at Liverpool, he's the go-between, really, between John Henry, Tom Werner in the States, and people on the ground in the UK, which is Billy Hogan as chief executive, and a number of others who work in sort of recruitment and data, as James said. And data and recruitment departments will be key. They know everything that's going on here. They would have known about this decision and they would have been planning for the future. And I thought it was very decisive and almost like ruthless that Liverpool said, manager is going, staff are going, sporting director. It was like a clearing of the decks. That said to me that there is not a firm plan in place, but they know they are going to deliver a new team, and it had to be a kind of sweeping of the broom, really. And so yeah, Mike Gordon, we understand, will be leading the process around the time that sort of Liverpool entertained interest in a complete sale or investment from outside. Mike Gordon kind of stepped back a little bit, but since then he has immersed himself once again in Liverpool, and that's said to be a very good thing for the club. And he's highly regarded and well connected, and works with and listens to the right people. And so yeah, Mike Gordon alongside a small number of people. I think they've got Jonathan Bamber, who's increasingly involved in matters there, and people like Barry Hunter on the recruitment side, David Fallows, Will Spearman. And so Liverpool have actually built an operation there that, whether it be player recruitment, contract renewal, or changes in staff, executive and managers, they're well thought of throughout the industry. And I would back them to deliver a really good appointment and new setup. And it's not going to be easy because they're some of the biggest shoes to fill. But in terms of their structure, I think they're in a decent place from which to build.
Yeah, I guess the bigger question now is who's next, who can take this job on? And it's a big job, as you've just said, David. Raf, we see what he's doing at Leverkusen. I've heard this quite a few times, almost one of the names immediately thrown in there. Is it as easy as saying, let's take what he's done at Leverkusen and then bring him straight to Liverpool? I mean, he hasn't even finished that job yet.
No, he hasn't finished the job. And there are a lot of people who say Xabi Alonso will do things very slowly, and a chance, to win trophies this year, but then to play, for example, in the Champions League with Leverkusen for the first time next year will be very appealing. At the same time, if the offer really does come around, I think it's going to be very, very hard stroke, if not impossible, to turn it down. Who wouldn't want to be the Liverpool manager with this Liverpool team? And with the kind of backing in terms of having the decision-making process that Klopp has enjoyed, although it wasn't, I think, to begin with, because the idea was that Klopp would work within a system, and he did for many years, but I think his power grew. And now there's a point where's the footballing expertise around him. So that might be one of the drawbacks of the current setup, that people say am I starting from scratch here if I become the manager? Who am I speaking to? Who are the people making the decisions when it comes to scouting, etc.? No, but Alonso will feature very highly for two very obvious reasons. One, the football that his team plays is really good. Let's make it three reasons. The second one, he hasn't gone and bought superstars and then, okay, suddenly they're playing like superstar players. He has improved every single player. That's going to be hugely appealing to FSG with their model. One of the main reasons, and James will know this as well, one of the main reasons why FSG's decision came down on Jurgen Klopp rather than Carlo Ancelotti was that Ancelotti in the interview said, I need a new striker, I need a new midfielder, I need a new defender. And Klopp said, I will work with what I have, and then we'll see what happens. Alonso will be the same. I don't think Alonso's going to come in and say, I want this, I want that guy. Having worked in Germany in a different system, that's going to be very appealing to FSG. And the third reason is that Liverpool, and Klopp has proven this, in contrast with some of the previous appointments, Liverpool need a manager who is to a certain extent larger than life. He needs to have charisma. He needs to be able to understand what makes the city tick, what makes the club tick, the institution. He needs to, I think, have a command a level of respect in football beyond Liverpool. And Alonso does all these things. And I don't think you're going to find another candidate who'll come as close to ticking all these boxes as he does at the moment.
James, from a Liverpool perspective, Xabi Alonso, I mean, a lot of box ticking there, right? Rafa just said why he almost just gave him the job, really. Why he'd be such a good candidate. 2005 Champions League winning player, and obviously showing a managerial nous now in Germany. This would be a welcome, I imagine, a very welcome marriage for Liverpool fans.
Yeah, as we sit here now, I think he would definitely be the pick of certainly the vast majority of fans I've spoken to since Friday. As Rafa said, it's not just his body of work at Leverkusen that commands respect. It's also the fact that he has such a close affinity with the club. He was adored at Anfield as a player. As you said, part of one of the most iconic triumphs in the club's history. So yeah, I think. The big thing for me is also, as Rafa said, it'd be very, very difficult for him to turn it down if the offer comes in. However, he would only be normal if he was thinking, do I really want to be the man who comes in after Klopp, or am I better off sitting tight and being the man after Klopp? Because it is such a hard act to follow. It was interesting listening to Klopp on Friday saying he will have absolutely no role whatsoever in terms of picking his successor. It's not going to be a Ferguson, David Moyes type situation at United. And he also said there'll be no Ferguson style U-turn. So this is very much down to FSG, which direction they go in. So I think De Zerbi at Brighton has to be part of the conversation when you look at the job he's done there. Postecoglou has been mentioned, obviously well documented.
In terms of passion and
and obviously has that affinity with the club. Although of course he's still very early on in his reign at Tottenham, and I'm sure that wouldn't be an easy one to try and negotiate him out of. And even someone mentioned to me how much they admire the work of Thomas Frank on very limited resources at Brentford. But yeah, I think Alonso has to be regarded as the outstanding candidate currently.
Yeah. David, do Liverpool fans also have to think about, look at Manchester United, for instance, this rebuild, this let's get the club back to where it needs to be kind of conversation. I mean, it's taken United 11 years. Do we get a sense that Liverpool are trying to approach this slightly differently?
And not just Manchester United, but Arsenal too, post Wenger. Let's see what happens one day when Guardiola leaves Man City. But the difference is that Liverpool, I think, are better set up than Manchester United or Arsenal were at that moment in time. Manchester United in particular, I think Sir Alex Ferguson was papering over a lot of the cracks that had built up under the Glazer ownership, and that dated back to 2005. He left in 2013. So that was a long time for certain departments and structures to fester. Arsenal had begun the sort of rejuvenation and rebuild the chief executive at the time, Ivan Gazidis, began appointing heads of departments that didn't exist before, head of recruitment, head of high performance, head of contracts, and so on, so that Wenger was starting to work in a more continental model that would succeed him. Liverpool kind of already have that in place, and that gives me quite strong conviction that they are going to have some continuity here that maybe those other two clubs didn't enjoy. That doesn't make it an easier decision. It doesn't make all of Klopp's reign easy. Like, let's not sort of look back on this with rose-tinted spectacles entirely. There were tough periods where sections of the fan base weren't happy towards him, weren't happy towards the ownership, still aren't, in the case of many, towards FSG. But as far as you can go, I think, you know, Liverpool are in decent shape, and I don't think the other two were. And but you know, a lot of conversation around the industry, and this might be a consideration for Xabi Alonso, Roberto De Zerbi, Thomas Frank, or whoever may be next. And we are assured that Liverpool will approach it without emotion and in a clinical fashion, to get the right appointment, not necessarily just the populist one. But the person who replaces Klopp, you know, it's not easy. It could be a bit of a poisoned chalice, and that proved to be the case at Manchester United, and you could argue it still is. And it was definitely incredibly tough for Unai Emery at Arsenal, and it failed, but didn't make him a bad manager, as we've seen since at Villarreal and Aston Villa. And I don't want to say this for Liverpool, because the fans will all be hoping that it's going to be a continuation of the success. But it is plausible that they have a downturn, and that it's the person after, or the person after that gets things back to this level. Or maybe they won't recapture these heights, but it doesn't mean that the future can't be successful in its own right.
Yeah, very quickly in terms of what Klopp does next, Rafa and Amy Lawrence basically put this on X, and I thought it was really poignant in comparison in speaking about him leaving now, and she compared it to the Wenger era and how demanding the job can be. You know, she says there is so much sacrifice to the altar of the club. The demands multiplied by a number of years are beyond most. Massive admiration for Klopp for recognizing the cost on the job. Wenger explicitly spoke about, you know, wishing he'd been able to do other things, you know, like he talks about having a daughter, wish he could have more children, wish, you know, probably cost him his marriage and his relationship at certain points. And, you know, when Klopp did sign the new contract, he mentioned how his wife was okay with it. Is there an element of, you know, I need a bit more normality, I need more family life? He talks himself as being a guy from the forest. Is there an idea that, you know what, I just need to recharge my batteries at this point?
Yeah, this is something that's very much coming out of Germany and people close to him, that he wants more family time. His adopted son has just had a child that makes him a grandfather. The Klopps are building a house in Wiesbaden, which is sort of near Mainz and Frankfurt. Frankfurt is where the German FA are based, very, very close. You could drive to your office, if indeed you need an office as a national team.
Are you saying he's going for the German job? You've said this a few times now.
I'm not even sure.
I'm just reading between the lines.
Well, I'm saying it because I think he's too young and too passionate to be out of football, full stop. And the fact that he's talking about a sabbatical rather than a break in his career or stopped his career, I think hints very much at the fact that he wants to do something else. And geographically, in terms of energy levels, in terms of where he is as a manager, I think the national team manager job ticks so many boxes for him. And the whole nation would love him to be in that position. The most powerful man in German football at the moment, Hans-Joachim Watzke, is the closest ally of Jurgen Klopp from the Dortmund days. So it's almost, I think we've almost come to the point where, from a German perspective, we all expect it to happen. And it's just a question of, will he start straight after the Euros, or will he wait a little bit and then take over when Germany gets closer to the World Cup? But I think it's all arrows, if you will, are pointing in that direction. And as I said, it's something that we've heard from people close to him over the last couple of years, that it was very much something that he had, I think, targeted. And the fact that he's made this decision now, I think, gives everyone a lot of time to figure out what the best way to do it is. But I think it will happen.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I tell you what, I think in unison we could all agree that Jurgen Klopp's energy, nous, wit, and his rock and roll style football will definitely be missed in the Premier League. Huge thanks, guys, for your time on the pod, David, James, and also Rafa as well. Please remember to rate and review the podcast if you're enjoying it. And also you can subscribe to The Athletic with our latest offer available at theathletic.com/football pod. Thanks for listening. We're back tomorrow. If you like this video, click subscribe for more content like this. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season to bring you the inside track to the biggest stories in football. If you'd like to listen to the full episodes for free, search the Athletic Football Podcast wherever you get your podcasts from.